So there's been a lot of conversation about government waste in the news in the last couple of weeks, but I have noticed a conspicuous refusal to discuss the actual problem. So let's do that. So Musk often talks, for one thing, about how the government has gotten too big, it's bloated, it needs to be downsized. But the size of the federal government, the federal workforce, hasn't really changed in 40 years. In fact, it's actually smaller now than it was in 1984. What has changed is the size of the private contract workforce. So if you want to understand why it is so expensive for our government to provide benefits to its citizens with the tax money that we pay them, consider the highly inefficient way that we have chosen to do this in America. It's called privatization. Okay, privatization is the process of taking public services that belong to the public, were paid for by the public, and outsourcing them to for-profit companies. What could go wrong? So let's take a company called Maximus, for example. Now, Maximus is a publicly traded company. They administer welfare benefits in the US. Here is their 10K filing. You will see that 4.2 billion of their 4.9 billion in revenue came from the US government. Their gross profits on that money were $1 billion per year. It's a profit margin of about 20%. But don't worry, I'm sure they're using that money efficiently. Or consider that more than half of people on Medicare are actually on the public-private partnership version. It's called Medicare Advantage, whose largest provider is, you know them, you love them, folks. It's United Healthcare. That's right. I'm sure that's going super well. I'm sure they're not having any issues. Now, the supposed benefit of privatization is that, hey, private companies are incentivized to provide better services at lower costs, right? But when there's little to no competition for the government contract, well, now you're just getting the worst of both worlds. But the real issue, the crux of this problem to me, is that privatization is the process by which you are taking public funds and turning them into private wealth. It replaces a public official who is accountable to you, the electorate, with the board members of a publicly traded company who are accountable to nobody but their shareholders. So the right question to ask is not, is this efficient? The question is this democratic? And the answer is no. Any conversation about government waste that does not even feign a passing interest in privatization of public services or refuses to look at the private sector dynamics that cause 1/4 of Americans to need government benefits in the first place is not a conversation that is happening in good faith. So what are they focused on instead?
$47,000 for a transgender opera in Colombia. $32,000 for a transgender comic book in Peru.
Good, yeah. Do not fall for this political theater. The fantasy being sold right now is that the only thing standing between you and success and wealth and power and happiness are DEI programs and trans kids that want to play volleyball and undocumented workers. Do not lose sight of reality, because that's the reality. That pink line, that's not the wealth of the 1%. No. That's the top 0.01%. If you want to know the broke bitch shit that's going on in the 1%, you got to go all the way down to the yellow line. Yeah, so if you have less than $17 million, you are actually so close to the x-axis that it is indistinguishable from zero. Recognizing your place on this chart, that's called class solidarity. And you know who's really good at it? Billionaires. Those motherfuckers hate each other, but they recognize that their interests are aligned. And we can fix this country together as soon as we recognize the real problem. So look me in the eyes, okay? Please remove Elon's boot from your mouth and stand up, because we have work to do.